Hey everyone, my name is Rebekah Gordon, and I am one of the student ministers at Trinity Baptist Church in Raleigh. And so I do a lot of our college ministry and young adult ministry at Trinity.
My name is Christian Davis, and I get to work with the youth, the high school, and middle schoolers here at Trinity, and also help with recreation as well, and then spend a little bit of time with the college students when Rebekah lets me. But the primary focus is with our high school and middle school students. We've got what many would consider a rather large youth group here at Trinity, and the way that we approach it is to try to make it feel like a smaller group. And we do that through our small group Bible studies and also our Sunday schools. And even during this time of quarantine, we've placed a heavy emphasis on our small groups. And we were able to continue to meet via Zoom for about the first few months of quarantine. And now we've given them a little break. And Rebekah and myself have been able to plan some small in-person social distance Bible studies where we try to connect with the students and get to be with them in smaller groups and connect with them in that way.
So I think something that's really important about our ministry model at Trinity is just the consistency of having those small group meetings every week. So whether you have some really important faith conversation or your kids are all distracted that week and you don't talk about anything important, it's just good for us to all be together every week in those small group settings. And so that's something that's kind of been an emphasis for us and has been really important for us at Trinity, just worrying about how much small groups matter and how important they are to kids. And so that's one of the things that we've chosen to kind of focus on moving forward with COVID and it being something that we can actually get done and have the kids be together, whether that's virtually or in person. It's something we're going to try to do as much as we can.
And so about a year and a half ago, we took the time to walk through the art of group talk with our small group leaders. The book focuses on ways to make your small group times more effective, more efficient, and the way we shape our small groups here at Trinity is we want to make sure that each small group, and they're broken down by grade and gender, and we want to make sure each group has at least 2 or 3 leaders, and those leaders are there to help them to grow in their relationships with Christ, to teach them messages from the Bible, but also to just be sounding boards for them, to be people that they can trust, that they can rely on, to share their lives with. And so we wanted to make sure that our leaders felt that they were equipped and enabled to be able to share life with our students. And I think that this book does a really good job. It teaches them how to prepare for their small groups, but also how to connect, how to really get to know your students and engage them in ways that are going to help them develop relationships with their leaders, but also with their peers, and then ultimately relationships with Christ.
This book we're talking about, The Art of Group Talk, really just focuses on this idea that small groups matter. And we think that now that we're not going to be able to meet in large groups, possibly for a while, that small groups are going to matter a lot. And so what the book talks about is that even when your small group conversations feel totally pointless, or kids are distracted, or you don't even end up talking about faith at all, those conversations and those relationship building moments matter. But there are ways and steps we can take to make them matter even more. And they point out 5 ways that we can do that. The first being to prepare. The second, to connect with our kids and help them connect with each other. Then to know our kids and help them know each other. Then to engage with them. And finally, to move them to action based on their faith. So we're going to talk about those 5 steps in these next few videos. The first chapter of this book talks about the importance of preparing for your small group. And obviously this book was written before COVID, so the tips are non-COVID specific. So they say the 4 steps to preparing are to read your email from your youth minister, your church, whoever's sending out the small group information, to rehearse what you're going to say, to pack a survival kit, and to pray for your students. All of those are still really important, but the way you prepare now may be different than how you did before COVID. It's going to be hard to think of those new and creative ways to prepare. Zoom conversations can be kind of awkward if you're meeting over Zoom. If you're meeting in person, you have to think of ways to be COVID safe. So all of these things, I think, especially rehearsing what you're going to say and thinking ahead of time of what you can do is going to be so important. For Zoom, I've found that students are much slower to answer questions. Maybe they feel a little more uncomfortable. So having a study that involves less question answering might be good, or having a study where they can answer questions over the chat feature might be helpful. Finding what works for you and your students will be great, and preparing those questions ahead of time will be super helpful into making those things run smoothly. If you're meeting in person, we're struggling to come up with games that are COVID safe and keep youth apart from each other. So one of the ones we did that was really fun was we did sort of a kickball blackjack kind of thing inspired by Topgolf. So we wrote out card numbers on parking spots like an ace, a jack, a 10, and then had kids kick the ball into the parking spots, and where it landed was the card they got, and they were trying to get blackjack. So those are some fun and good things you could be doing during COVID, but it's always a good option to reach out to other youth ministers and kind of get ideas from them so you can be more prepared for those small group times you're going to have over the next few months.
Chapter 2 of The Art of Group Talk focuses on connection. And connection is something that can come easy for some, but can be quite difficult for others. Particularly in the midst of this quarantine situation that we're in, connection can become even more difficult because we're likely either doing it behind computer screens, behind masks. There's just that added element of disconnect between either leaders and students or students and fellow students. But ultimately, a lot of what the book suggests are things that happen outside of our small group meeting times anyway. So even if we're unable to meet in person, or if you're not currently having Zoom meetings, there's still a lot of key steps that we can take to be able to connect with one another. One of the things it suggests is, if you're typically having small group meetings, to connect during the week before those meetings, either through a group text or weekly check-ins. If you're a small group leader, it's great to have a group text with your students and just seeing how they're doing weekly check-ins. One of the things we like to do when we meet in person is to have students say their highs and lows, just kind of the peaks of their week and the pits of their week. And that's something that you can certainly do via Zoom or in a group text message as well, just to get a gauge of where students are. And ultimately, one of the things that the book wants us to remember as we try to connect with them is to understand that they're likely not exactly like us now or when we were teenagers, and we have to remember that some of the struggles and the ways that we approach this quarantine situation might be different from how they're approaching it and what they're facing. So it's important to listen and to hear them, and that helps us connect during these times as well. And we also want them to connect them with each other, which again is difficult when you don't want to be in person too much or having students in close contact with one another. But just finding unique ways, whether it's via Zoom, to just put in a game time where you can include some of the icebreakers that you might typically use in a youth type setting, whether it's just a silly question or some type of game you can play on Zoom together, or texting one another and just asking them to reach out to a fellow student because you know that they're going through similar things. So it's a challenge to connect during these times, but ultimately we know that these connections are just so important, and it's important to make the effort to keep them up and to be intentional about them throughout this season of quarantine.
Some of the best advice they give in this book is in the knowing chapter. And they say that we don't have personal, meaningful, and authentic conversations with people unless we have relationships with them that are personal, meaningful, and authentic. And this is so true. And so that's why they highlight the point of knowing your students and helping them know each other. Because kids are so much more likely to open up in these conversations if they know you and they know each other. And even more importantly, before kids can feel known by God, it's really important that they feel known by people who know God. So taking this time of COVID especially to get to know your students better is so important. So a few of the ways they suggest getting to know your kids better is by knowing their worlds, knowing their personalities, and knowing their distractions. So learning the distractions of your small group is going to be really important to have productive conversations. And those distractions in Zoom are going to be totally different than they are in person. So just kind of getting to know those and trying to nip them in the bud as early as you can would be great. Knowing their personalities is really important too. Some kids are going to be more introverted, some kids are going to talk more, and trying to sort of regulate that so that all kids feel heard, but also kids aren't feeling put on the spot or uncomfortable is going to be super important in the small group time. And knowing their worlds is a big thing. For a kid to feel known, you kind of have to know all those little things that make up who they are. And so now's such a good time to learn a lot of that stuff. Maybe you can highlight a different kid on Instagram each week, or start an info scrapbook where you keep some information about them to help you remember. Or make it a point to interact with a kid in a new way every week, maybe on social media. All of those can really aid at that process of you getting to know your kids better so that they feel known by you. In this knowing chapter, they also talk about that survival kit that we talked about in the prepare section, and that's all linked on the PowerPoint. You can kind of get some tips of ways to celebrate your kids, keep them less distracted, and highlight all those different voices. So you can look on the PowerPoint for that. But one of the other things they talk about that is really important is helping your kids get to know each other. And so they say some of the ways you can do that is by making group memories, building a group identity, and setting group guidelines. So if you're having small groups on Zoom or even in person where kids are going to be interacting with students in the youth group that they maybe don't normally interact with, setting those guidelines for confidentiality is really important. Building a group identity is important. So maybe that's a new group text or group me to send out those Zoom links. Maybe it's tie-dyeing t-shirts or masks outside to kind of bring everyone together. And then making those new group memories is key, I think, right now during COVID, that we're still getting people together in whatever way we can, depending on regulations, so they can be making memories together throughout this time. So maybe that's going on a hike, maybe it's going on a picnic, but maybe it's Zoom games or karaoke or virtually doing something together. Whatever we can be doing to keep kids connected so that they know us, we know them, and they know each other.
I think that one of the challenges that we've faced this summer is the difficulty to engage students throughout quarantine. Our summer schedule certainly looks a lot different than it normally would, not having our summer mission trips and other trips that we might take where we get to see students on a regular basis and have different conversations with them and just experience that growth in their faith throughout the summer. And so in these periods where we do get to spend time with them, whether it's on a Zoom call or doing our small in-person Bible studies that we've been able to do, we want to make sure that we're very intentional about engaging with them and making the most out of that time that we have with them. And so the Engage chapter of the Art of Group Talk encourages three main things. It encourages us, one, to speak less and listen more. I think we can all agree that there's no shortage of opinions right now, and our students hear them on TV, they see them online. I'm sure they talk about it with their friends, whether it's about coronavirus or anything else that's going on. And so in these moments where we do get to see them, we do get to meet with them and talk with them, I think it's important for us to provide them a space to speak, to share, and to feel like they're being heard. I think we can do that in a number of different ways and try to be creative during this time, whether it's a book study or a Zoom Bible study or trying to do something in person. But to speak less, listen more in those times, and also to control less and to lead more. Come prepared with questions to ask and not just ready to give answers, not ready to give our opinions, but to hear their opinions and accept and embrace the silence. I don't know about y'all's Zoom calls. Our Zoom calls have plenty of awkward silence waiting on students to give answers. It's a lot easier to hide behind your computer screen. So don't be afraid to give it that time, that space where there is silence, where they're thinking, where they're building up the courage to respond. And then lastly is to script less and to improvise more. A lot of our Sunday school teachers have made it pretty clear that our curriculum is not built for a virtual audience. These group games, these group activities are really tough to do when you're not in the same place together. So be prepared to have backup plans, be creative. Try things like creating a trivia game, doing games like Two Truths and a Lie. We had a teacher that brought some props from her house to Zoom Sunday School the other day, and it really boosted the discussion and got kids involved. Just different things that you can do to be creative, to get kids out of their element a little bit and more engaged.
The final chapter of the book is talking about moving your kids, and it's pretty simple. It's just talking about trying to move your kids to engage in a life of authentic faith by challenging them each week at the end of your small group time. So maybe you do that by asking, how are you going to live out what we talked about this week? Maybe you do it by doing prayer requests and praying together. Maybe you do it by explaining something that you're going to do to move with them during the week. Maybe you do it by saying something meaningful to them at the end of your group. And those are all ideas from the book of ways that you can show your kids you're moving with them. My favorite one from those is to say something meaningful. And sometimes it can feel sort of weird, especially over Zoom, like half the cameras are off and the kids are probably texting or like half asleep. But it's always an important thing for kids to hear that you love them or you're proud of them. You're here for them if they need someone to talk to right now. You're praying for them. Those simple statements at the end of those small groups and those Zooms can mean a lot. And if you're having that problem of kids not really showing up on the Zooms, maybe they're tired of it, not showing up to small group, even sending those individual texts with just one of those statements can really uplift a kid's week and remind them that you're thinking of them, you're there for them, you're praying for them, despite all this craziness with COVID.
So we know that everybody is together and trying to navigate what youth ministry looks like during quarantine, and we've certainly been doing that over the past few months and are trying to figure out what these next few months are going to look like for us. And so we just wanted to share some of the things that we've been doing and what we think we might be doing in the future. For worship, we were able to put together some virtual worship videos and be creative with that. We utilized some of the more talented fellow youth ministers that we know, since Rebekah and I don't exactly have too many musical gifts, to put together some worship videos that had messages and worship songs that our students could sing along to at home if they wanted to. And we use those each week to facilitate our small group discussions. So that's certainly one avenue to go with in terms of worship. For games, we've done everything from different Zoom games, and you can find a bunch of those online. And then also we've started to be able to do some small in-person social distancing games, and some of those are more fun than others, but it certainly gives a different element to it. And then for full youth group fellowship, that's really something that we haven't been able to do right now in person, and if we're being honest, we're not sure if we're going to be able to do it in the fall. And I think as youth ministers, all of our situations are different, and so many churches may be able to do that, and that's great. But for some youth ministries out there, I think it's just okay to be at peace with the fact right now that you're not sure if you're going to be able to do your normal youth ministry activities on a Wednesday night or a Sunday night come this fall, and to not break your backs trying to figure out some perfect plan to make it work, but just to understand that right now some of these things are out of our control. But the big important thing for a lot of us is that minister to student time. That's something that I think we get a lot of during the summer when we get to go on mission trips and other different trips that you might have. And for a lot of us, that really fuels what we do. That's why we want to be ministers, particularly with students, because we want to spend that one-on-one time with them. And so I'm sure a lot of you guys are hurting right now because you're not getting it, and it kind of drains you a bit. But I would just encourage you to look for different ways to connect with them, whether it's just doing something like writing a letter or sending a postcard, just sending a text and starting conversations here or there, or even if you're able to put together some small in-person gatherings where you get to spend time with them, connect with them, catch up with them. Just being creative to get that, because it does help fuel what we do, and it is why we do what we do.
So we've put links to some of those virtual worship services, online articles, games you can do online, mental health resources and other stuff like that onto the PowerPoint, so we hope that you guys can check those out. And I'll close us by reading this prayer from St. Francis. And it says, "May God bless you with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice and oppression of people, so that you may wish for justice, freedom, and peace. And may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in this world, so that you can do what others claim cannot be done. Amen."